It's wild to think about these 18 and 19-year-old kids, many of whom had never been outside of their state. And suddenly they are on their first airplane flights ever. They crossed the Atlantic. And those troop transports, they drop the door, basically. And you're stepping right out into Nazi machine gun fire at 18 and 19 years old. Wanted to make sure we, as both big history buffs and American history enthusiasts, mention today, which is the 78th anniversary of D-Day. And Buck, I've talked about how incredible it was of an experience to get to spend the day touring all of the D-Day beaches. There are still survivors who are over in Normandy today celebrating that historic occasion. And I thought, let's listen. Here's General Eisenhower's D-Day message to the troops 78 years ago today.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory.
It's amazing, Clay. It's a reminder of what those men at that time were facing. And I know I mentioned this to you off air, but for me, I guess I was in the 8th or 9th grade when Saving Private Ryan came out. That initial sequence, that D-Day sequence, I think had more of an impact on me than any other military recreation on the screen I've ever seen. I mean, I still remember being in that theater at that time and seeing what our soldiers had to go through in that landing and what that meant at that time. It's like seared into my brain. And I know there's still some actual D-Day survivors, veterans out there. And, we don't have that many left.
It's wild to think about these 18 and 19-year-old kids, many of whom had never been outside of their state. And suddenly they are on their first airplane flights ever. They crossed the Atlantic. And those troop transports, they drop the door, basically. And you're stepping right out into Nazi machine gun fire at 18 and 19 years old. And the bravery of those guys and what they did. And then to think about the trajectory of where our country is today, where we've gone from that generation fighting actual Nazis, Buck, to where the current generation on social media calls people they disagree with on political related issues Nazis.
Yeah, we've debased courage in this culture, or rather, I should say,
to such an extent.
The left has debased courage to such an extent where they think that, crying and screaming and yelling at people for not wanting to use make-believe, not even just whatever pronoun, but, there's a whole movement to have make-believe pronouns, call people, XZ for Z. That is the equivalent of storming the beaches at Normandy. I mean, they actually think that they're the heroes of our society for taking no risk and actually being the oppressors within our society, which I think the right has increasingly woken up to, that unless you stand up against these individuals, they will immiserate you and think that they're good people for doing it. Not just with COVID, with everything.
And I think the other lesson here is sooner or later, big words and talk matters. But sooner or later, people who are truly evil use violence. And you have to be willing to respond in kind violently, right? You can't talk the Nazis out of not invading, right? You can't talk bad people out of making the choices they
There's
made.
a portion of our society. I mean, obviously, you and I are both part of the what I've called the 9/11 generation. I mean, I went to the CIA because of 9/11, and we had a few million veterans serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. But there's a portion of our society that I think rejects the idea that at some point your freedom as a society and as a people is reliant upon men and women who are willing to get into the equivalent of a Higgins boat and brave machine gun fire and take the fight to the enemy. That actually is the final, the final bulwark, the final defense against tyranny. And a lot of people in our country right now don't accept that, don't understand that, I think, unfortunately.
How many 18 and 19-year-olds who think they're so brave for sitting around on social media calling out people all day long would be willing, calling them Nazis, would be willing to step into a hail of gunfire to fight against actual Nazis?
People that call folks who use the wrong pronoun Nazis, they would never actually show up to fight against real Nazis.
Thank you all who did.